the Secretary to the Home Office, Matthew Rycroft, and the second Permanent Secretary to the Home Office, Patricia Hayes. So you're very welcome. We have a lot of questions that we want to ask you today, so I would ask that your answers are as short and as concise as possible, so everybody has an opportunity to ask their questions. So I would like to start with the Home Secretary, and yesterday, the IOPC report was published into the Charing Cross Police Station incidents that set out a culture of, to quote, toxic masculinity, misogyny, homophobia, bullying and abuse in that police force. And the IOPC said that it was not just a few bad apples and that these incidents were not isolated incidents. So I wondered, Home Secretary, do you think that police forces are institutionally misogynistic?
So, good morning, Chair, and congratulations on your election to committee as well. I think there are a number of things to say actually about the report. I've read it, you've read it, and quite frankly anybody else that's read that report will just be absolutely appalled and sickened by what the content of that report. And also so much that was actually exposed through that particular investigation. First of all, I think, and I say this as someone who spends a great deal of time with the police, being a police officer is an absolute privilege. And what we saw through that report is a privilege that has been abused by just the appalling and sickening behaviour of specific officers. I personally think, and I have spoken about this many times, that there are problems with the culture and some aspects of the culture within the Metropolitan Police. I touched on this last year specifically, if we recall, around what was a very, very difficult and appalling and sad time post the murder of Sarah Everard. That also exposed a range of issues, and Chair, as you'll know, I now have the Angelini inquiry and also the police inspector at HMIC investigating aspects of policing culture as well. I do think there are some very, very serious and significant matters that need not just following up, but further investigation through both the inquiry and through the inspectorate, primarily because we're not seeing one-off incidences. I think we should just be quite clear about that. We are not seeing one-off incidences. It's not isolated. We have seen now too many times, too many instances where in policing, we just see the most appalling behaviours, the most appalling conduct. I also think it shows a failure of leadership in some quarters. So you've asked me the question about institutional misogyny within policing. There are cultural issues there. What we saw in the IOPC report absolutely points to I'm not even going to say just misogynistic behaviours. I think it's cultural and attitudinal. You could see that through some of the messages that were in the report yesterday published. And that is why, through the Angelini inquiry, we are specifically looking at the culture of policing, because we've got to really pull back the layers in terms of not just attitudes, but what is that culture? What is that culture that permeates in policing, and what are we going to do collectively to change that?
Do you think we need more of a kind of Macpherson-style inquiry, though, into misogyny in the police force?
So my instinct on this, speaking very candidly right now, is no. We have the Angelini inquiry. It's a very specific inquiry, as we know, and it's the genesis of that inquiry is heartbreak and tragedy. Clearly, we still have some deep questions that need some big answers as to what happened, and also with HMI. I mean, I speak to HMI frequently. I commissioned them. I think it's fair to say in the last year I've commissioned them too frequently as well, which is a very, very significant indicator in terms of some of the issues around culture, vetting, ways of working. I would just suggest, Chair, and I would say this, I would like to see evidence and details from those inquiries and also the commissioned work with HMI. First and foremost, should we need to go further, quite frankly, we will go further. I wouldn't rule that out. I'm not ruling that out.
Bishop James Jones, who was very involved with the Hillsborough inquiries, he yesterday called for a Royal Commission on policing. He said it was 60 years since there'd been such a commission. Policing has changed enormously in 60 years. All the things now that police have to deal with, including some of the issues that you've just identified around who we want to serve in our police forces, and the vetting, the skills and experience that we want in our police officers. Do you think now is the time for a Royal Commission?
So I'd say a few things, first of all. Let me just also put some things into context around policing. The majority of our police officers do amazing work. I think let's not lose sight of that. They are incredible human beings. They really are. I think this is a terrible and a very difficult moment for everyone in policing, actually. You know, there'll be police officers that will be upset, they will be angry by what they are seeing, reading and hearing. And just to give one example, and I'll come on to the point about the Royal Commission in a minute. Just last Friday, I was actually in Nottingham, Nottinghamshire Constabulary, with the chief and with their amazing officers. And they reminded me yet again, and I hear this wherever I go, and we all hear it when we speak to our officers, you know, one force, one inquiry, one investigation should never, ever contaminate policing per se, everyone in policing, because obviously all our officers are out there doing great things. This is also a time when we are recruiting many, many more officers. We have over 11,000 more officers on the streets of England and Wales.
I think we'll come on to that, yes.
Absolutely, we will. But with that, of course, ensuring that their training, recruitment and vetting, you know, is fit for purpose effectively, and, you know, in tune with how policing should be, the standards that we want and require is absolutely there. But on your point about Royal Commission, I mean, I'm not going to say and sit here today that, you know, we must have a Royal Commission. I will, however, Chair, say that I wouldn't rule anything out in terms of future Royal Commissions. And on that basis, not just on policing, I would go further. I would suggest going further in terms of wider end-to-end, because it's policing and criminal justice system in terms of the outcomes, because policing is just one component part, let's not forget, of the wider criminal justice system. And I'm sure today we'll speak about rape review and you know, interactions with the wider system, the CPS and things of that nature. So I think it's really important. Policing is obviously frontline, visible, and right now the spotlight rightly is on policing. There can be no excuses for the appalling behaviours and what we have seen in that IOPC report, and it is quite clear that there are cultural problems and issues in policing. No question about that. We need to, through the inquiries that we have in place right now, find out what on earth is going on, and actually start acting post those inquiries to start resolving those awful issues that are now surfacing in the way in which they have.
I think we'll want to ask you to come back once those inquiries have concluded, because we want to see then what the action
I would be happy to do so.
Okay, I've got some specific questions I just want to ask you about. So the first one is about spiking. The committee's been looking at spiking in recent weeks. So do you agree with the MPCC lead on drugs, Deputy Chief Constable Jason Harwin, who told our spiking inquiry that there should be a specific offence of spiking? Do you agree with that?
So there's a lot on spiking. In fact, on Friday when I was in Nottingham,
I'm really going to have to ask you just to answer that question, because I
will answer the question, but I think I should put it in some context as well. Because if you do recall, I think it was last September time when spiking became a really big issue, and let's face it, we were watching the news and hearing about spiking. We have to put the context together, Chair. It's important.
Can I just stop you, Secretary, because we have taken a lot of evidence on spiking, so we're very well aware of the context. I just want to know whether you actually agree there should be a specific
I'm going to come on to what I want to see done, because I think actually context matters in terms of me not just answering your question, but also specifically saying why I reached a conclusion that I have. I spent time with policing, and I've spent time with our policing leaders as well. Nottingham is a good example of a police force. They were one of the ones, first of all, that were contacted about spiking. And even speaking to Caroline Henry on Friday, the Police and Crime Commissioner there, she commissioned the work into spiking. We asked Maggie Blythe to look at the phenomenon of spiking, a new trend, appalling trend, but also we're still trying to understand the problem itself, the genesis of it and what the component parts are. I appreciate you've taken evidence on this. With that, of course, I've asked MPCC to specifically look at this issue with police forces, and off the back of, you know, our own learnings, and it's early days, you know, it's very early days yet. We don't have the full details. We don't have enough evidential information. But I have asked my officials, Chair, to look into what we know thus far with MPCC, how we can pursue offenders, but also how we can, and you'll know that there are already a list of offences in terms of drugs that can be applied, but how we can prepare a specific criminal offence to target spiking directly.
So you're looking at preparing a specific offence?
So we are looking into this, absolutely.
Okay,
so we are working towards that. But it doesn't mean tomorrow. I'll be very clear to the committee and to the public that will be watching this. Do not expect an announcement tomorrow that we'll be creating a new offence on spiking.
Okay,
we still have to understand the genesis, the details, the evidential base,
we understand
also
what
the
you're
prevalence
saying.
of this too.
Thank you. I just want to ask you now a series of questions, and I would just appreciate short answers because I want to make sure all the committee members have a chance to ask their questions. So this is about seeking updates on the government strategy on tackling violence against women and girls. So first of all, where is the domestic abuse strategy? It was due to be published in 2021.
So the strategy is still it's being worked upon right now.
When will it be published?
So first of all, we want the strategy to reflect the outcomes of the recent spending review. So we've just gone into spending allocations post the SR. So our strategy must absolutely be reflective of where money is going to go and also capture ambitions of the whole of government. So
when do you think you'll
be
able
the next
to
coming months? I'm not giving a date.
So the next couple of months. So by the end of March we will have the strategy.
So I don't know if it will be the end of March. I mean, we are literally, you've got to remember it's not just a Home Office strategy, it goes across government.
Of course,
and
but
that's
you
the whole
promised
point.
it would be done in 2021. I'm just asking you about a promise that government made.
No, I understand that, but at the same time, you've just heard me say that we are allocating post the SR the allocations for funding for the programming around the domestic abuse work and strategy that we're doing, which doesn't just sit with us as a department, it goes across other government departments.
It was a promise government made. So where is the perpetrator strategy? Because as I understand it, Section 75 of the Domestic Abuse Act says there's a duty on the Home Secretary to publish a perpetrator strategy within 12 months of royal assent. So that's the end of April. So will that be published in time?
Well, I don't have a date for publication. I'll be very clear about that.
You won't be fulfilling the duty under Section 75.
Well, I don't have a date for that. That's what I've said. I don't have a date for that. And it's right that we have a duty to prepare and publish that comprehensive strategy. But again, we've got to bring the perpetrators to justice and pull all the evidential parts of the Home Office work and the justice pillars together, and then that comes together as a piece of cross-government work. So I don't have a date. I don't have a date for that, and of course we can write to you and provide you a date.
I'm surprised because obviously that was a duty that you put into your own
It is a duty,
bill.
but it's not just, you know, unsurprisingly, the work on perpetrators, again, just doesn't sit with the Home Office. It sits across government with the MOJ, which is very clear. And the work of the domestic abuse, not just strategy, but the Act and now the bill at the time when we were discussing this in Parliament, but also the Act itself goes across government. So we are working through those pillars. And there are a number of pillars on the DA strategy that go across government that we will publish when we have all those details.
Okay, so something that is within the remit of the Home Office. When will the mass communications campaign be launched?
So that work has actually been signed off by myself. So that'll be in this quarter of this year. So there is a whole programme on communications. I've actually gone through it, so I have seen it.
So by the end of March?
So it will be happening this quarter, absolutely.
Okay. What's the timescale for an announcement around filling the gap in the law with the new offence of public sexual harassment?
So in terms of the offence itself and closing the gap, and when will that be published specifically? I don't know. I don't know, Tricia, do you have the date?
I'm afraid I don't have a date.
We can send you that. We can absolutely send you that and write to you with it.
And then you mentioned earlier on about police vetting and the uplift, the welcome uplift in police numbers. But I just wanted to ask you about whether you're confident about the current vetting procedure for police officers and whether it is suitable for keeping police officers safe. And I wanted to refer you to a report around the use of specialist online centres set up in the pandemic to cover assessment, pre-employment checks and an offer for people applying to work in the police, that there seems to be an issue that there's no face-to-face interviews at all. And then one recruit said the first time he spoke to somebody in person was for his uniform fitting. And I just wondered whether you felt that that was effective vetting.
No, it's not.
After what's happened with the
answer
for example,
is no,
the Sarah
it's
Everard
not effective
case.
vetting at
So
all.
police forces like West Midlands, Wiltshire, Avon and Somerset and Hampshire are still using that way of recruiting. Is that appropriate?
No, well, it's not. It clearly isn't. And with that, of course, there is work taking place actually with HMI on vetting.
You're worried about officers who are being recruited at the moment under those
schemes?
So
there are a couple of things actually. First and foremost, on the Police Uplift Programme and new recruits, we're very clear in terms of standards, requirements and vetting. So the department is very, very clear in terms of the thresholds, the standards that should be in place. Every single force, they are operationally independent, but even so, they have clear requirements, public safety, safeguarding standards. There are proper processes that should be followed. There's no question about that. And not only that, HMIC have constantly pointed to vetting, consistency, raising the bar. If nothing else, the lessons of the last 12 months should send a very, very strong signal and message to every single police force around the country about safeguards and standards and making sure they get the foundations right around vetting.
My final question is just about the issue of tackling non-contact sexual offending before it's allowed to escalate. And the reason I'm asking you about that is because in the case of Sarah Everard, we know that the perpetrator had exposed himself, and that idea of low-level sexual offending. And also in my own constituency, I had a case of Libby Squire, who was raped and murdered, and the perpetrator there had been prowling the streets for 18 months prior to Libby's rape and murder, and had been exposing himself, masturbating and taking part in acts of voyeurism. And obviously there is an issue about how you deal with that low-level, non-contact sexual offending. Do you think there needs to be a look again at what more can be done to stop that behaviour escalating?
Absolutely.
And what is that? What can we do?
Well, I think first of all, if we look at this, if we look at this within the sort of wider context, I mean, we've just touched on perpetrators, behaviours, and much of what we've spoken about in the work that's taking place, obviously, is still within the DA remit, but it's also linked to the violence against women and girls. Approach, strategy. I mean, look, these behaviours are just appalling, and the level of escalation needs serious attention at the outset when these behaviours are identified. They should not be dismissed. I actually, on a human level, struggle with anybody that finds that, it should be just dismissed and not actually looked at, because there'll be a range of issues around any individual, a range of issues, mental health, all sorts of things, criminality. And therefore, in terms of, you ask me what more can be done, should be done, again, across pillars of society, I'm not going to say government, but health, social services, policing, we need more work done in terms of drawing those strands together, because otherwise individuals will just effectively be ping-ponged around the systems or parts of the state, not being given, if they need help, support, prevention, whatever it may be, to stop them from actually having behaviours that then escalate.
So is the Home Office leading on that?
So that is part of the wider work, yes. But it is across government on perpetrators, escalations, looking at some of the root causes as well. I mean, the root causes of people's behaviours. From a Home Office perspective, we very much are there in the intervention or the criminality side of things and the policing side. But there is much more that needs to happen in terms of the join-up and the interventions before it even gets to, policing levels and, sadly, the criminality aspect.
Okay, thank you. James Daly.
Thank you very much, Chair, and good morning, Home Secretary. Approximately 90% of the rape allegations that are made to forces in England and Wales are not referred to the Crown Prosecution Service. So essentially the police discontinue those matters. Why do you think that's the case?
Well, I think on rape, there's been a lot of work that's taken place around rape review, which is just the whole rape review approach and strategy was pretty harrowing. There are a number of reasons. I think we should just be very honest about this. A number of reasons as to why cases effectively are not being pursued. Some are with policing in terms of forensics, digital downloads, all the things that I'm afraid familiar and territory and, all the reasons that we know about. That said, though, government isn't just sort of shrugging its shoulders and saying this isn't good enough and, we're not going to do anything about this. From a policing perspective, first and foremost, we have new initiatives. We've got the pilot with Opsiteria, where clearly there's a lot of direct engagement with the police taking place in terms of actually providing more support, digital downloads, but importantly more support for the victims, giving victims confidence to come forward, protecting them throughout all the evidential processes. But, and I say this very strongly, but of course this is about the end-to-end approach, effectively how policing gathers evidence, how cases are put together, how cases then go to the CPS, and then actually the support through that end-to-end system of the criminal justice system, and giving victims the confidence, giving them the confidence to actually go through every single stage of actually then following up with prosecutions.
I agree with that, Home Secretary, but I think I just want to come back to the point. 90% approximately of rape allegations are not going to the Crown Prosecution Service. The police themselves are taking no further action, not referring it on even for advice. That's 90% of the total potential victims of the most horrific offending are not even getting a chance to have
We're trying to change that.
The Crown Prosecution Service. So my question to you is, when you're speaking to the police, why do they tell you that's the case?
So, look, historically there are, I can't really speak about sort of the historical aspects of policing, and the rape review is absolutely trying to tackle this and change this. That's the point. That is the point. And that is about bringing all aspects of the criminal justice system together. It's pretty obvious that what has happened has not been good enough. It hasn't been good enough. You go force by force. I speak about Nottingham again. I saw incredible work in terms of what they do on evidential basis, collection, forensics. I actually saw how they handle rape cases when I was there on Friday. So you've asked the question,
it's about
why?
The leadership of the police, then, isn't it?
I'm not going to say that, no. There is inconsistency, force by force in policing. There is no doubt about that. There is inconsistency. Historically, force by force, you will know this if I may say so with GMP, data collection, reporting of crime. GMP has had a terrible time on this in the past, and that's a failure of leadership. There's been no doubt about that in Greater Manchester. But force by force, it is not consistent. And specifically now, when you look at the work through the action plan from the end-to-end rape review, the scorecards, progress reports, the work that we are now doing, we want to change all of that. It is appalling. It is absolutely appalling. There should be no excuses. But, as someone, the Home Secretary here, working through these challenges with the Ministry of Justice as well, we've got to do better. We have to change policing attitudes. We have to give them more of the tools and the ability to actually push these cases onto investigation, and also support them through the training and the resources that they need.
I think police leaders must be held accountable. But I'll use an example, Home Secretary, on a different offence, but a very serious offence that affects many, many people in our country. So the police failed to solve 1 million burglaries over 5 years up until 2021. 1 million burglaries. Now that is not only frightening, astonishing, appalling. Now, I'm not going to ask you what you feel about that, because I think I know what your answer is going to be. But we didn't need a strategy. We didn't need a discussion regarding how to address this problem, because if we go forward 12 months, and forgive me for looking at my phone here, but there have been, and I quote, this is from the Telegraph, dramatic fall in burglaries after police sent to scene of every break-in. Now, I don't think it would take 50 civil servants to sit in a room to come up with a strategy to say we should send police officers to burglaries. And the three forces, which are mentioned here, and thankfully one of them is Greater Manchester. Greater Manchester, Bedfordshire and Northamptonshire, who pledged to send an officer to every burglary. We have seen in the last 12 months significant falls in burglaries. So my point is, we can have all the strategies in the world, we can call everything different, whatever it is.
Yeah.
But if people actually if people actually go and investigate offences correctly and properly, we have positive outcomes for victims.
I would agree with that. Look, I'm not going to dispute a word that you've said. I'd rather not be, we have the Beating Crime Plan for a start. The Beating Crime Plan, absolutely, and rightly so, that is a government strategy. That is a government strategy and plan to beat crime. And within that, of course, you'll understand, all colleagues here understand the structures in policing. Police and crime commissioners, Home Sec, the money coming from central government, how it's allocated across police forces. You're right, absolutely, Mr. Daly. It shouldn't take a strategy and a plan to tell the police officers to go directly to every single reported burglary. But through the Beating Crime Plan we are holding the police to account through these measures.
It's reported here that only 3 forces in this country are sending police officers to every
we want every
every
single
burglary.
force to do that, and that's the purpose of our work.
But my point is who is accountable in respect of that?
Sure.
Because somebody will have to explain to me why police and crime commissioners exist, because they don't seem to be accountable to anybody for anything.
Well, there is that.
Chief constables seem to be answerable to police and crime commissioners. And then you are up here.
Absolutely.
The last
I'm accountable
line.
for all of them, despite their operational independence and despite the money and the resources that we give them.
So I think policing is a lot less complicated than a lot of people would make out.
Sure.
Go out and arrest people. That tends to be the way to get things done. You don't need to talk about it. Go out and do it when members of the public phone up. Is that an outrageous comment for an
No,
MP
it's
to
absolutely
make?
right.
Yeah.
It is absolutely right. It really is. The police are actually accountable to the communities within which they serve. They're accountable to the public. Yeah. And wherever you go, and I would say this to all colleagues, speaking as a Member of Parliament myself and not just Home Secretary, you'll know when you hold policing meetings in your own constituency with members of the public, they are angry. They are angry when they're reporting, their tools being nicked from their van, and the fact that officers did not come out to actually look at the van and actually follow up on the crimes. The fact of life is that with the resources and the training and everything that's going into policing right now, record sums, you're right, we shouldn't really need a strategy, but we have a strategy as a government because we are adamant that we should be cutting crime, reducing crime, and aspects of crime, are going down. Not all aspects, I should add, but even so, it is a statement of the obvious, in my view, for forces to just get out there and follow up on every single crime. And guess what happens when you do? With the resources you get the type of results that the 3 forces that you've spoken about have.
And the last number of questions is on one subject that I talk about a lot because I think it is fundamental, is the problem as I see it, having been involved in the criminal justice system for a long time, is not the court system, it's getting the cases into court and how they're investigated prior to charge. I could spend hours with you, Home Secretary, discussing the charging standard, but we'll leave that discussion for another day.
I've spent hours on it too.
Tell me what you think of release under investigation as a concept.
So, well, how long we got? Release under investigation obviously covers a lot of grounds and has been with a lot of controversy as well. Has been with a lot of controversy. With that though, release under investigation also means that we do have to do a lot of work to protect victims. Who clearly are, the level of vulnerability around victims, particularly through certain cases under release under investigation.
Including rape?
Well, actually, I think rape is the most prevalent one, actually, if we speak about it. Is very hard and very, very difficult. It really is. Release under investigation should not be used, in my view, lightly, or generally, because obviously in the way in which police officers are not acting in fast time, real time to gather important evidence that could then actually not just safeguard the victims but lead to faster evidential prosecution and getting cases into the criminal justice system.
Unless release under investigation is changed, we're going to continue to have problems. Can I ask either Mr. Rycroft or Ms. Hayes, can you give the committee an idea of the numbers of people who are currently released under investigation in this country?
I haven't got that in front of me, but we can write to the committee chair with that advice. I would add to what the Home Secretary was saying, that the sense that we need across government to be thinking about the whole of the system. As the Home Secretary says, this is not just about policing, this is about joining up with prosecution, with the courts, and then with the prison system. We need to think about it system-wide and make sure that we are progressing the timeliness on every single stage.
Mr. Rycroft, you must, as the Permanent Secretary, have an idea. I'll rephrase the question. What's the average time a alleged perpetrator is, if they are released on bail, is on released under bail? How long are they waiting for something to happen on average?
I'll have to write to you with that information, and I'm very happy to do so. Obviously, it will depend on the different crime types. It will probably also depend on different parts of the country, but we will, to expand on the point the Home Secretary was making earlier, we are using the power of transparency, shining the spotlight on individual police forces and policing in general in an accountability framework that reports to the Home Secretary in order to improve the performance of individual forces. That's precisely what we do through the scorecards and so on.
Last two final questions, and I apologise for being grumpy. I'm astounded that you don't know the figure. Absolutely astounded. It is fundamental that I can tell you now that there are people for the most basic offences, the most basic. If you walk down Bury High Street and somebody punches you in the face, and there are witnesses to that, you are likely to be released under investigation, not charged. And you are likely to be lost within the system for months and months and months. And it is frightening when you consider that this is not just, should we say, what could be considered low-level offending. This is serious offending. Yes. And so it gets back to the point they've been asking questions about. The Home Secretary is here to talk about the strategy, but there has to be accountability from your department as to how you hold police officers to account. And I've given the example. You can come up with all the strategies in the world, but unless that police officer on the street is actually going out and arresting people and doing it in a timely and efficient manner, it doesn't matter what your policy is. And I want to know how your department is ensuring that police, chief constables, police and crime commissioners, whoever it is doing what you want them to do. Because nobody, unless you're going to tell me something different, nobody wants people, the figures that we have for rape, the figures that we have for burglary.
I totally agree with you on the point about accountability and about how the system needs to work together, and that is precisely what we do. In addition to the Criminal Justice Task Force and the other governance structures that we have that look across the whole system, as I was saying earlier, we also have the National Policing Performance Board, which the Policing Minister chairs, which is the body to hold the police, force by force, to account on their overall performance.
It's not working though, is it? So.
Well, we are using that mechanism in order to drive improvements precisely in the areas that you and other committee members are describing.
I think this is a conversation about process, right? Bureaucracy and structures in government. And at the end of the day, public want to know that officers are actually investigating crime, that criminals are being treated in a very, very serious way. I mean, and they want outcomes. They absolutely want outcomes. And I think, we've got tons of process. It's kind of like we're from the government and we're quite good at process, and we just wrap ourselves up in process. There is something here, though, and your line of questioning is really quite important, because actually this comes back to one fundamental aspect about public confidence in policing. The public, we want the public obviously to be confident about policing. We want them to have trust in policing. Look at the conversations that we've had this morning already. We've covered vetting, covered IOPC, all the stuff that actually undermines public confidence. Delivery, absolutely, in terms of accountability, clearly has to be with the local public. But to your point as well, Ms Daly, chief constables and police and crime commissioners, absolutely are the ones that should be, PCCs in particular, holding the chief and also officers to account on all these core crime types. The Beating Crime Plan, I am coming back to that very deliberately. We set the framework, we set the targets. We've set targets. We have set targets on crime reduction, serious crimes, because any harm is outrageous. It is absolutely outrageous. But with that, of course, we, through strategic policing board and everything else, we do hold them to account. So I don't want committee to be left under the impression that we're not chasing them and absolutely holding them to account.
My final point is the police are not the social services. They are there to investigate offending. They're not there as a bureaucratic organisation to fill out endless paperwork.
Yes. There
needs to be a reaffirmation to the leadership of the police that the public wants the police to go out and arrest people and put them before the courts. That is it. That's what undermines confidence, not whether all the other things we're talking about. And I know that you understand that, and I will hand over at that point.
Can I just ask one question? On the rate review, which you referred to, can you just tell the committee which minister is responsible for driving the rate review through? Where does the book start?
So in the Home Office, it's our safeguarding minister.
So you're junior minister?
But no. So we don't just have one minister, because obviously we have the policing minister cuts across both departments. He's also an MOJ minister. So the safeguarding minister and Kit Malthouse, our policing minister, they work together on the rape review and delivery of the metrics, because obviously the rape review is just not, we don't look at it just from a Home Office perspective. It does cut across both AGO and also the MOJ, and very deliberately, I mean, if you see the action plan with the rape review, the scorecards, the police inside.
We understand that. We just want to know who is ultimately responsible for making sure that the rape review and your plan to get back to the 2016 levels.
Yeah, so that
who is responsible for that?
It sits with Kit. It sits with
Kit Malthouse is
he cuts across both departments.
Okay, thank you. Diane Abbott.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'd like to thank you, Home Secretary, for giving up the time to speak to the committee. You may be aware that President Macron has been quoted today on the Channel crossings issue, and he said in an interview with a French newspaper that the UK economy relies on low-paid, illegal immigrant labour, and I quote now, "The British continue to have a system from the 1980s which manages economic migration through hypocrisy. There is no legal immigration route." And he goes on, "The British must articulate their needs in terms of the economy and reopen a path to legal asylum requests. We are going to step up the pressure." Do you have a response to that, Home Secretary?
So, well, first response is, first and foremost, we speak to our French counterparts all the time on illegal migration, channel crossings, which clearly is a very, very significant problem. And at the same time, alongside our wider work, and the French government are fully briefed on the work that the British government is doing, the Nationality and Borders Bill, the investments that we put in France in terms of protection, working with their surveillance teams and also working with intelligence cells and policing. But Macron's comments are wrong. They're absolutely wrong. So let me be very, very clear about that. And alongside that, I should also say that the French government, the entire French government, both the Interior Minister and President Macron, are fully aware through the very good work, actually, that our ambassador in Paris and her team does, in terms of, number one, the cooperation that we have to have with France to combat the dangerous and unnecessary crossings, dealing with illegal migration, but also working with like-minded partners across Europe. So those comments are they're just wrong.
Thank you very much, Home Secretary. I wanted to ask you a few questions on the role that the Navy is going to play in relation to migrant crossings. How do you envisage that role?
Well, first of all, it's a hybrid role involving both the Ministry of Defence and the Home Office. So there has been a lot of work that's taken place. Clearly, now over just under 2 years in terms of looking at patrols in the Channel, how that could be conducted, but also, importantly, having a deterrent impact and effect in the Channel. Permanent Secretary Matthew may wish to speak about the joint work, because we do have joint work underway right now, both with the MOD, and it is with the MOD, not just the Navy, it is the Department MOD, and with Border Force. Those details are being worked up right now, actually. There's a lot of work taking place, a lot of planning, because effectively we have to look at all sorts of aspects of how we operationalise in the Channel, very much in terms of sending out a clear deterrent impact and message.
You'll be aware that the Minister of the Armed Forces responded to an urgent question about this. I think it was on the 18th of January. And he said, details of how Defence will deliver and maintain the primacy of cross-channel counter-migration operations are currently being worked through. Are you saying that working through process hasn't been completed yet?
So it's still taking place.
Okay. And just tell me a little bit, do you envisage these naval vessels being involved in interception?
So that work is taking place, so I'm not going to comment on operational planning.
Well, the Armed Forces Minister said in the House, he said in terms, the Royal Navy will not be directly involved in the interception of ships. Are you saying he's wrong?
Well, that work is not complete, so it's totally inappropriate. It's inappropriate for me to comment on operational planning in terms of what either the Navy, or actually MOD, not just the Navy and Border Force, will be doing and how they'll be operationalising. Because as both our permanent secretaries know, who are actually working with MOD officials and with military planners, that work is, it's operational, it's sensitive, and quite frankly, it's not for me to comment on the tactics that they'll be using or the approach that they'll be using.
The Defence Minister could comment.
Pardon?
The Defence Minister could comment.
Well, he has
Why
given
are
a
you saying
comment.
you can't comment
Primarily
now?
because that work is not complete, as I've already said.
This was on the 18th of January. On the 26th of January, the Defence Committee took evidence from Vice Admiral Sir Charles Montgomery, KBE, and Commander Tom Sharp, OBE. The Vice Admiral said that in terms of departmental and government responsibilities, he was, and I quote, a little confused, and that it was unclear where strategic and operational responsibility lay. Do you know where strategic and operational responsibility?
Well, first of all, I've already said, and in fact, I think I said this in the House a few weeks ago, actually, during oral questions. The Prime Minister has effectively asked for the MOD and the Home Office, rightly, to come together to look at how both departments can play a critical role in defending our borders from all manner of different threats in relation to small boat crossings, migrant crossings. That work is underway, it's being developed. As I've already said, I'm not going to give operational details. It is right that both our teams at an operational level work through all of that, and there is a great deal of work right now taking place across both departments, and my Permanent Secretary and the Permanent Secretary from MOD are also involved in planning and the coordination of that work.
The Armed Forces Minister was happy to speak about these things, and amongst other things he said, and I'm quoting from him now on the floor of the House, neither the Royal Navy nor the Royal Marines will be engaged in pushback. Is he wrong?
Well, as I've already said, I'll say it again, there is work taking place right now between the two departments. That's planning and that's coordination work in terms of how the two teams will work together. So it's not, that work has not been finalised, it is still underway. So the Minister absolutely gave a view. He gave a view.
So but view, those are facts.
Well, they're not facts. They can't be facts because the work is still underway. That operational work is still underway. So, while I appreciate he was responding to questions in Parliament, whether that was at committee or an urgent question, this is work in progress. So it's wrong to say anything specific with regards to work operationally that is still being planned. That work has not completed yet.
It's surprising to have a Secretary one thing and a minister say another. As I said,
neither of us are actually doing the operational planning. It is really for the specialists to be working on that.
As I said a few minutes ago, Vice Admiral Sir Charles Montgomery, KBE, said that he was confused about where strategic responsibility and operational responsibility lay. Are you able to clear up the confusion?
Well, there is no confusion because our two teams, and I think the British public will be reassured by this actually, they'd rightly want to know that two government departments are coming together to recognise that there is a major problem with illegal migration in the Channel and that we are working together to resolve this and find operational means where we can actually defend our borders from a manner of all different threats in the right and proper way. And it's right that both our teams are given the time and space to actually undertake that work, look at operational primacy, look at the two roles of the roles of the two departments, look at where responsibilities lie, look at the planning expertise, look at the coordination and delivery of assets, and actually work through proper plans. I don't think that's too much to ask of two government departments when it comes to actually trying to protect our borders.
Well, I'm sorry that you can't clear up the Vice Admiral's confusion, but when the confusion has been cleared up, would you be able to publish the details of strategic responsibility and operational responsibility so that Parliament can review and scrutinise it?
Well, I think first of all, it's actually for the two departments. We don't, in the same way that we wouldn't publish strategic operating plans for the Royal Navy. I can't see us doing that for operations in the Channel as well. That would actually go against the grain of trying to protect our borders and having deterrence at sea. But quite frankly, it is right that we work through all the, as I've already said, delivery of assets, planning, coordination, and the two departments. The two specialist teams, these are very, very senior specialist teams with the type of expertise that we simply do not have as members of Parliament. They are operational teams, they are professional teams. They need to just be allowed to get on and do the plans and therefore, work through the tactics and the strategies that they are going to be deploying.
I don't want to prolong this line of questioning, Chair, but it's extraordinary that the Armed Forces Minister can be clear on these matters, but you cannot. But to move on...
Just before you do, Diane, sorry, can I just be clear? Because of what's been said, Home Secretary, are you saying that the Armed Forces Minister was wrong in what he said? Has he misled Parliament?
No, he hasn't misled Parliament. He was responding to an urgent question before the two teams had actually come together to do the operational planning.
He was wrong in what he said because it hadn't been decided.
Well, at that stage, in terms of the timing, he has absolutely not misled anybody. The timings of the UQ, he was responding. He came to Parliament at a time when literally the commissions have just been stood up. So it does take time. As with all operations, it takes time to work through the details. So on that basis, neither of us, and I say this because it's officials, quite frankly, and it's right that it's officials, it's right that it's the experts, whether it's from maritime, safety, from the Border Force, also from the MOD.
I just want to be clear what you're saying about what your colleague, your government minister said. Was that correct in what he said to the House?
But what he said, I've got to first of all say, you're providing selective quotes. If you want to go through the entirety of what he said, he also basically made it quite clear in that UQ that much of this work was being developed and underway. And I'm absolutely saying that is exactly, he didn't mislead anyone because that is effectively what has been happening. That work is underway. It is not complete at all.
He didn't mislead us in saying that, and I'm quoting, the Royal Navy will not be directly involved in the interception of ships. He didn't mislead us.
Well, he also went on to say details of how Defence will deliver and maintain the primacy of the Channel to counter migration operations are currently being worked. So that's the point.
I have to tell
so you can selectively quote him, but also there are other quotes there where he made it very clear to Parliament that this is work in progress and that work is underway.
I was actually in the chamber for that UQ, and I have to tell you, Home Secretary, that my colleagues were not overwhelmed by the vagueness about things being worked through. But what he did...
Because it can't be specific. It's operational work that's taking place. You will not expect a minister to come to Parliament and disclose effectively military primacy at sea and what operational plans would be.
Move on. The Commander Sharp, in giving evidence to the Defence Committee, accepted that if the military get this operation wrong, there's a real danger of their presence encouraging as opposed to deterring people to make the journey across the Channel to England. Do you agree with that?
Well, first of all, I don't. I absolutely do not, because I have confidence in the expertise of our teams that are working through operational details. I think actually it is incredibly irresponsible for any speculation around this area. None of us sitting in this room are expert planners in terms of how to operationalise at sea. It is right that the government comes together, as the Prime Minister has pulled together two departments to look at this strategically. So the responsibility of one department, this is a whole of government effort, and therefore it is right that we bring in the specialists, we bring in the expertise, we bring in people that actually understand the dynamics at sea to actually do the operational planning and work. And quite frankly, I think that's exactly what the British public want to see.
Thank you, Home Secretary. But are you saying that Commander Sharp not to mention your fellow Minister James Heapy were being irresponsible.
Nobody's being irresponsible. I think actually the comment is anyone that's making speculation around actions should clearly recognise the work that is underway, particularly with the Ministry of Defence, where they have the expertise, and they should be left to get on and do that work rather than just speculating on outcomes that are completely not decided.
Finally,
question,
yes, of course, Chair. The Home Secretary, you'll be aware that in 2019, HMS Mersey and HMS Enterprise were deployed in the Channel. They did not intercept any small boats while on patrol for several weeks. Why do you think it's going to be different this time?
Well, that's very much for the operational teams to work through that. Again, I'm not going to give a running commentary on operations that are still being developed and tactics that are being developed. And I think it's fair to say, I mean, Matthew and the team have been leading this work actually with MOD. We have, and it's right that we leave it in the hands of the experts to actually run through not just primacy, the operational work that's required, because the Prime Minister could not have been clearer that this work, by pulling together two departments, is also about defending our borders,
Okay, thank you.
as well as making sure that we can save lives.
Can I just very briefly add?
And then I'm going to come to Tim Loudon.
Just very briefly add a couple of points to what the Home Secretary said. So first of all, yes, the overarching intent of the government strategy is deterrence. We want to deter people from making what is a dangerous journey in order to save lives. That is a shared humanitarian responsibility that France and the UK have. Given it as a shared border, we share the Channel. The changes to the operational or the strategic responsibilities in the Channel have not taken effect yet. There is no change as we currently stand here on the 2nd of February. There will be a change in the future because the Prime Minister's decided and the Home Secretary has set out, the Armed Forces Minister set out previously what the sorts of changes would be. But as the Home Secretary has said, that operational detail is not complete, and when it is, the announcements will be made in the appropriate way.
Okay, thank you very much. Tim Loudon.
Good morning, Home Secretary. You'll be relieved to know I'm not confused. And I want to firstly apologise for not being here at the beginning. The reason was I was helping to host a group of French parliamentarians who are here at the moment and who will be meeting the Home Affairs Select Committee this afternoon. And when I met them this morning, I showed them the headline that's in the Times. I didn't even have to read the French press for it, and I have to say they were rather embarrassed by it, to say the least. I want to come back to that issue in a minute, but can I just tackle you on a couple of other technical things? When you came in front of this committee on the 24th of February last year, I asked you about the issue of the test of English for international communication and that scandal where many hundreds of overseas students had been kicked off courses, had lost their fees, lost the ability to study or work in the UK. You said, and I quote from the record, that perhaps when I come back to the committee, I'd be very happy to talk about what you're doing as a department on this. From what I can see, legal action is ongoing, and nothing has actually been done by the Home Secretary, and these poor people are still in limbo. Have I missed something?
No, we are absolutely dealing with the legal actions that are taking place, which has really complicated the system because we are not able to deal with cases while we've got ongoing legal action. And, I mean, it is, as you will know, memory serves me correct, Tricia or the team, Matthew might correct me on this, it was a matter of remote testing which is subject to the legal action. And it is because of that outstanding litigation we can't actually take further steps. I think that is the latest position on this.
That's correct, Home Secretary. If I could just build on that very briefly. So, I think we share your frustration that we're not able to make more progress on this. I mean, we are waiting for that kind of critical determination of the litigation case that's in the upper tribunal. I think, two pieces of modestly good news. First is that we're expecting that very soon now. And second, that we haven't been sitting on our hands while we've been waiting for that case to conclude. So we have been doing a lot of planning internally to make sure that when we do get that determination, that we're ready to announce a way forward almost immediately afterwards. So it would have been better if the litigation had concluded sooner, but we haven't let it delay our action planning.
Okay, that's encouraging to hear, because Home Secretary, when I raised it with you, you were very helpful, offered to take it away and report back to the the committee, and we've not had any report back, and it's almost a year.
Yeah.
I think rather than just waiting for Godot, that if you were to give us an account of exactly what has happened, what planning that you can reveal is in place, that will be a help to give some lifeline to those people whose lives are absolutely in limbo.
And it is a terrible
possible,
situation,
please.
as we know historically with the cases. So I think on that basis we can talk about the work
Fine,
we're doing.
thank you for that. The second thing, to switch to Afghanistan. I have, as we all did, dealt with various cases of people with constituency connections escaping from Kabul, and I have several constituents who are in hotels, or people linked with the constituents in the hotels, including one who was at a not very good hotel with young children, with appalling food, terrible conditions, and complained, and was subsequently told to shut up and moved to an even worse hotel on the basis that he was a troublemaker. Various people in my constituency know him well, and he's anything but a troublemaker. I spoke to him in the queue for the Barons Hotel in Kabul. He went through the most terrible time. His daughter was injured, had to leave the queue to go to the hospital, and they have been through a terrible time, and have now effectively been bullied by whichever firm or officials have been dealing with that accommodation. Can I come back to you with that case, because that's particularly alarming? But the bigger point here is, where are we with the numbers of families who are still in these temporary hotels, whose lives are in limbo, kids relying on some local schooling, and then, as has happened in this family's case, they get moved to a completely different part of the country, so they are completely disrupted. When are we going to see some progress on this?
Yeah, well, it is. I mean, it's an awful situation. It really is, and I'm very honest, open, and candid about the situation that we are in. First of all, we did the right thing under harrowing circumstances to bring people over to the United Kingdom. But, you know, we do not have the infrastructure. I'm very upfront and honest about that in terms of housing accommodation. And there is a lot of work taking place with local authorities. I would like to please drop me all the details, first of all, on your case. But we are struggling. We are absolutely struggling with local authorities finding housing accommodation. Also, we want to ensure that we can move people into work and employment. We want them to rebuild their lives here. So there is actually... This comes back to a process point, I'm sorry to say this. There is a cross-government task force. We have a Minister for Resettlement that leads on this, but we are desperately still trying to pull together different component parts.
Okay. I don't think anyone underestimates the challenge, and it was a huge challenge, and it was a huge feat to get as many people out as we did. Although, again, I've had complaints from people who worked within your department and others about the way it was handled, and the way that a number of life support contractors were not given the same priority as embassy security guards or chievening scholars. These were people who worked directly or indirectly for the British government and allied agencies, whose lives were just as much threatened, and who were not given any safe passage. Do you acknowledge that there are still quite a lot of people like that, undercover, in hiding, in Afghanistan, to whom we probably still do owe a duty of care?
Well, there are people. We know there are people, and we've been working, I mean, particularly with Foreign Office. This is very much now a lot of this working with the Foreign Office, and there are some still, certain categories that it's not for me to speak about publicly, where there is a lot of work taking place to find other means and routes to get them out of Afghanistan, working with third countries and neighbouring countries. There is a lot of work taking place there. I mean, look, the operation was harrowing. It was absolutely harrowing. It's still harrowing to think about the experiences that people went through, and also our teams across government. You know, our departments, we were night and day, rightly so. We dropped absolutely everything to support MOD. We sent, as colleagues will know, we sent Border Force teams to Kabul as well to help process, speed things up, help with identification. It was a very, very distressing time. Our challenge right now, and again, very upfront about this, if councils want to work with us to find accommodation, housing, you know, even jobs. I mean, we want to give people that new pathway to rebuild their lives. That is absolutely central to our work.
Can I just ask one thing, and then I just want to come back to channel crossings. When, and I remember your predecessors in front of this committee when we were dealing with Syrian refugees, and many of us were saying, can we mobilise a sort of task force of volunteers and others
Yes.
who want to and are practically able. Many people weren't. They were saying, I've got a spare room, I can take a family.
Yes,
Well,
sure.
it's not as easy as that. But we were able to mobilise lots of local organisations, faith groups or whatever, who were able to provide not just accommodation but the support networks to it as well, rather than having to rely on hotels. I've not seen that same sort of urgency and call to arms, because a lot of
There is
people,
work taking
and I
place
have
on this.
constituents who say, look, actually we could take on more people, even if the council hasn't got the accommodation available. We know those challenges. We think we can provide some accommodation, and importantly, the support network to go with it. And I'm not seeing that happening.
Well, we should never
urgently
underestimate the third sector, because there is
Absolutely.
work taking place on this. But Tricia can speak about sort of that mobilisation and the work across there's a lot of good work. Let me just give you that assurance. But of course, the numbers we are speaking about are significant, and of course with children, numbers of children, school places and things of that nature, but Tricia can speak about some of that work.
Thank you, Home Secretary. I mean, the Home Secretary's absolutely right. This is a huge whole of government issue. I thought maybe it would be helpful to start by bringing the committee up to date on some of the latest numbers, just so we know what we're talking about. So at the moment, so far we found homes for 4,000 of the people that we brought back from Afghanistan. We still, though, have 12,000 sitting in bridging accommodation. When the Permanent Secretary and I last came to the committee members shared with us some examples of individual councils who had struggled to connect in with the cross-government team on offers of accommodation, just as I think as you're describing. Since then, we've improved our systems and processes. We've put in place a dedicated portal that can be used by people who want to offer accommodation, that is a way of connecting accommodation suppliers, councils and us. We do also have a very...
How many people have used it?
I don't have that information about who's
Is it
using
really
it
being
yet, but
used?
it is up and running, and it's a core part of our operations now.
It is.
It's a much more efficient way of exchanging information. I think the last
It's matching.
time,
It helps to match people.
It does.
It would just be useful to get an idea of the numbers, because I
Yeah.
suspect that
We can
actually
show
it's
that
not,
to
it's
you
not
as well.
resulted in many being taken outside of just the direct council accommodation.
But I think we have directly addressed a kind of communications problem that was addressed the last time we were at the committee. I mean, I think it's important to just rehearse the financial offer that is available to councils who take people on. So this is we've got money for education, for healthcare, for English language. We've got a 3-year funding envelope per individual of £20,520, and we've got a special £20 million flex fund, and we're incredibly grateful to the 300 councils that have already stepped forward to help us, but we could always do with more. So it's a good opportunity just to have a call to arms to councils around the country to engage in the new communication and engagement tools that we've created and make places available.
I understand. The trouble is there's still 12,000 people, as you
Agreed.
just said, in
Agreed.
hotels, which is
Yeah.
completely adequate. We've got a family to look after. Can I come back, without trying to patient to the chair, to the Channel crossings? So last year, the figures, as you know, over
Yeah,
28,000, treble the year before, despite the fact the French are intercepting, though they're not doing anything with, treble the amount before they get into the water. The trouble is they don't process them. Nothing's working, is it?
Last year there were over 51,000 crossings attempted by migrants. 51,000. 28,000 arrived and 23,000 were prevented. So I think in terms of prevention, there is a lot of activity taking place. So it's not right to say nothing's working. There is a lot of work
You know,
taking
Home
place.
Secretary, what's happened. So when a group of migrants is typically at 1 o'clock in the morning intercepted by the gendarmerie, they are then have their boat confiscated. They are routinely allowed then to go free, and only if there's specific evidence attached to the person who's suspected of being the organising people smuggler will even that person be arrested. So the increase in interceptions could be the very same night, the same group coming back to do it again. So they're actually intercepting the same people, because the French are not arresting them. They are not, as they should be, and we are paying for, taking them to their processing centres to see what their status is, and then dealing with them, which remains the nub of the problem, isn't it?
Well, that's not the full picture, because there are arrests taking place and their prosecution and arresting system is very different to the British system as well.
They don't?
Well, no, not at all. That's why, I mean, if you look at the work that takes place on surveillance, there is more surveillance taking place. The French government have even changed their laws on use of drones so that they can... as we all know, parliamentary processes take time.
It's the courts.
But even so, they have changed their processes and their laws. They are now using much more to actually intercept, and through our joint intelligence centre as well, there is cooperation taking place. We can't speak about the number of prosecutions. Their French system is much more complicated, and it is very difficult, and all our systems are difficult and complicated. But, criminality groups are being arrested, they are being prosecuted, and certainly we are seeing more arrests and prosecutions, and we will continue to work with France on
But Home Secretary, the numbers who have successfully made that crossing, despite everything you say, which is undoubtedly true, has trebled, and that is the basis on which we are judged as to whether our immigration policy is working or not. So I recently met MPs from Calais, and I say I've been with MPs today. They make, I think, a legitimate case about the absence of safe and legal routes, although, as we've seen in Macron's statement, I think they're placing undue reliance on that. We discussed with them a proposal, and this is a proposal which is being fleshed up by the Republican Party ahead of their election. We're not going to get a result ahead of the election because Macron thinks it's good sport to be able to resurrect the Battle of Agincourt and as a vote winner, and so he's not going to come up with anything remotely practical and sensible. What the Republicans are looking at is if they agreed to arrest these people trying to get into the water, to take them to the processing reception centres, which we pay for, where they can be looked after much better and where they can have their status and their claims analysed. If we were to allow them to apply for asylum in the UK from those reception centres, which we don't at the moment, and if they would guarantee that those who were rejected by us would then not be allowed to go free and turn up on a beach again in Calais, but would be dealt with and returned to where they came from. Is that a goer? Because that is a practical way, potentially, if they would then intercept them and guarantee to intercept them and bring back to French territory, because that is what is getting people to those beaches.
The answer is no. The answer is it would not stop. It would not stop people making dangerous crossings, not just... just park the Channel route for now. People are making dangerous crossings, not just over the Channel, but even getting from Africa over the Mediterranean and going across Europe. They're still working with the smuggling gangs, not just to make the Channel crossing, but also to come upstream into France as well. I mean, that proposal will effectively make France a big magnet for more migrants to come. I don't know how the French public will feel about that. Processing centres or not, they have enough problems with camps and criminality and all sorts of issues taking place. So that is not a viable option.
Isn't the magnet at the moment of people coming into France and going specifically to the north coast of France and around Calais with all the problems that they're now having, the terrible conditions there, the fact that if they get into the water, the chances are they will make it to the UK. If as part of a deal, and it needs to be an EU-wide deal as well, and we have to do it by cooperating, that the French would agree to intercept those boats and take the occupants back to France. So it became known you are paying £3,000 or £5,000 to a people smuggler in order to make a round trip back where you started. That would stop that trade. And the quid pro quo is they could then put their applications in, because most of them have had their applications turned down anyway, but the French don't arrest them and then deal with them.
Well, there's no guarantee.
If we could come up with a deal like that, there would be no reason for them to go to northern France.
No, but at the same time, there's no guarantee that their applications would fail. There's no guarantee that they'd be removed to another country, because that also means France would need returns agreements with other countries, a range of other countries.
Well, that's part of the deal.
And
that's what we need to look at.
We have our own returns agreements with other countries, and we're expanding that. And let's not forget, I mean, we're speaking about the majority of the nationalities right now, Iraqi, Iranians. These are difficult countries to actually agree returns agreements with. So France unilaterally, they can't unilaterally have those returns agreements. They'll be working with the Commission. So it's not as binary as to say, let's process them in France and let the French then have returns, deals and agreements. There is a lot of work that would be required in that.
A lot of work will be required. This is a complex problem, but at the moment it's getting worse, not better.
Well, there are a couple of things, actually. First and foremost, it is because of the work led by this government, and because I have actually it is a Commission-led competency, as we know. The Commission has not been moving on this. However, we have good discussions with Commissioner Johansson, but also look at the action unilaterally that some other EU member states are taking. And France in particular could do more. I mean, currently, we have to be honest about this, their borders are open. Frontex, even stepping up Frontex to do much more in terms of patrolling borders and stopping criminality coming into France. That would be a positive measure. Belgium are doing that, by the way, and we have good cooperation with Belgium, not just on the law enforcement side, but also tackling the gangs. There are good lessons across other EU member states that France could actually learn from, and we are persuading them and pursuing that.
But they're not, and 28,000 people came across the channel last year,
yes,
and by all accounts, it's going to be worse than that this year.
But by all accounts,
two final questions.
We have to use every single aspect
two final questions.
Of the system.
We do, and I've suggested one practical thing that the French are prepared to look at, or certainly one party who potentially could come into power this year. Two final quick questions. Of those 28,000 people who came across, how many of them have left the country? And secondly, what safe and legal route would have been available to them coming across? And if the answer is, well, actually, not really anything, when will there be, as you promised for some time?
First of all, I don't actually have the numbers of people that have been removed. They're tiny. They are tiny for a range of reasons, as we know, pandemic, asylum processing, and inability to remove people from certain countries. But that doesn't mean we're not doing any work on these individuals in terms of removals. You've asked about safe and legal routes. For these particular individuals, the majority of them are single men that are still coming over. Right. For those that, and we'll be very frank about this, we have people coming over from Syria and also from Afghanistan. We do have the work of the Afghanistan resettlement scheme in particular. Right. That is a safe and legal route that has been stood up. And so clearly, there's a lot of work taking place, as you'll know, Mr. Lawton, with the Nationality and Borders Bill as well, in terms of returns, removals, etc., which is those combined elements that would actually help to stop the pull factors and have people coming over here.
If you're not Syrian or Afghanistan,
on safe and legal routes,
safe and legal routes are available?
Well, for economic migrants, they don't need safe and legal routes because they should be claiming asylum in many of the other countries that they're travelling through, rather than the asylum shopping that we see taking place. If you're not any of those,
what safe and legal routes are available now?
Well, the majority of them are people that are not claiming asylum or fleeing persecution.
I agree. So what's available to those who are?
Well, it's the ability to return them. It's the ability to return them to their country of origin. But the ultimate point is that they should be claiming asylum in other countries and not all coming here.
But what safe and legal route is available if you're not Afghanistani, if you're not Syrian, you're not one of those specialist schemes, and you are genuinely fleeing from danger and would be likely...
That's a different thing.
So that's likely to be granted
asylum status. So if you're fleeing, if you'll know through the Nationality and Borders Bill that we are specifically creating safe and legal routes for people of other nationalities who are fleeing persecution, who would be fleeing persecution. We currently don't have those routes in place, and we are going to be standing those up, working with the likes of UNHCR, and we've been very specific about that through the Nationality and Borders Bill. But currently, the problem that we have with illegal migration, and we should be very clear about this, is that the majority of people are not fleeing persecution. They are asylum shopping, and that is why they should be claiming asylum in other countries.
In which case, there's no problem with doing a deal with the French where those people will be turned down, and it's the responsibility of the French.
Don't know that they'll be turned down.
Well, it's down to us, isn't it?
Well, it will still act as a pull factor. People going into France. People going into France.
No. If they don't fit our criteria, we turn them down. Then it's back to the French.
They should also be claiming asylum in other countries because they're making very long journeys to other countries where they could claim asylum.
We're going around in circles on that one, so thank you for that. Can I just ask you if you could send us the figures of the removals that Mr. Loudon was referring to, so we're aware, because I think it was 5 at the last time we asked this question, so it'd be interesting to know how that's increased.
Yeah, we can put that in writing.
I'm going to take Stuart MacDonald next.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Home Secretary and Permanent Secretary and Deputy Permanent Secretary. Could I just ask, where in the Nationality and Borders Bills is there any mention of safe legal routes? Home Secretary just mentioned.
Actually, in the new plan for immigration and the work that we're doing in the new plan for immigration bill. Well, new plan for immigration, as I've mentioned many, many times.
Oh, it's just that you mentioned there that it was in the Nationality and Borders Bill.
Because the two are linked, the Nationality and Borders Bill and the new plan for immigration. That is the government strategy in terms of reforming illegal migration, the changes that we're bringing in, stopping the pull factors, and also about our returns and removals bill.
Fine.
It's in the new plan for immigration.
Yeah,
the Nationality and
fine.
Borders Bill is part of the new
Yeah,
plan for
yeah.
immigration.
Matthew Rycroft, in December, the Court of Appeal made clear that it's not illegal to set sail across the channel with a view to being intercepted in the channel or to arrive at a port to claim asylum. Is that correct?
That is correct under current law, yeah.
Okay, so Home Secretary...
But the Nationality and Borders Bill deals with that issue as well.
Wrote the word illegal there. The vast majority of these crossings are not illegal, according to the Court of Appeal.
Pardon?
The vast majority of these crossings are not illegal, despite the fact that you just about roared it there at the top of your voice, and that you use that word all the time. Most of these crossings are not illegal, according to the Court of Appeal.
Well, they're dangerous crossings, clearly.
Yeah, but they're not illegal. That's the question I'm asking
Actually,
you.
to be quite frank, let's just be very clear about what we are speaking about. As a government, our policy, we are absolutely working to stop dangerous crossings, but also tackle the issue of illegal migration. Illegal entry and illegal migration and illegal entry to the United Kingdom are linked.
But you accept that the Court of Appeal said that the vast majority of these crossings are not illegal.
Well, that's
an important
fine.
point, though, because you keep saying it.
Well, the work of this government is absolutely to deter illegal entry to our country and illegal migration.
Yeah, but you're deterring things that aren't illegal currently. But anyway, Patricia Hayes, just to follow up on a point in Tim Lawton's questions, you spoke about moving folk on from hotels. When Victoria Atkins was here, I asked her about this, and I was assured that it was in hand, but I'm still having local authorities approach me saying that they offer accommodation and they then have to wait months before the Home Office takes them up on that. Why is that still happening?
So that's not what we think is happening, and if there are individual local authorities that are having this experience, then definitely send them in our direction. The reason that we've set up these new communication mechanisms is that so that we can work with local authorities and accommodation providers as quickly as possible. Sometimes I think we're facing issues where the kind of accommodation which is being offered may not be, it may not fit what's needed for a particular family in a particular place.
You're monitoring the length of the time that these things are turned around.
So I don't think we're collecting data on every single time our local authorities in touch with us about accommodation.
Okay.
But yeah.
I find specific examples in it.
That would be good.
Okay, thank you. When you were here last, Mr. Rycroft, I asked you about the economic impact assessment, and you said that, I quote, the Home Secretary said it will be published shortly. Minister Pursglove also told us in November it will be published in due course, and he said the same in a couple of written PQs. Where is the economic impact assessment for the Nationality and Borders Bill?
What I said before continues to be true.
Well, Home Secretary, when are we going to get to see the economic impact assessment for the Borders and Nationality Bill, or Nationality and Borders Bill? Is it not fairly fundamental for us in scrutinising this legislation that we get to see how much the Home Office...
The legislation has been well scrutinised. If you look at what's going on in the House of Lords, I think it was second day of committee yesterday.
Yes, but I've been unable to persuade people, and we've been unable to persuade people that the idea of deterrence through criminalisation and differentiation and so on is the wrong way to go.
It's not what I hear on the doorstep. I hear that the British public want the government to take all the necessary action to prevent dangerous crossings
that's
and
not
to
what
stop
I hear
legal
at all.
migration.
But anyway, I'm putting that argument to one side for today. We've had that argument at length. But I want to know, how are we supposed to scrutinise this bill if you don't publish? Surely just as a mark of respect to Parliament, you will publish that document before it
The bill has had plenty of scrutiny. It continues to be scrutinised.
So you're not denying
and quite
it is?
frankly, we're already working on making
Can I
sure
just
that we
stop
can...
both of you? We cannot hear if you both talk at the same time. So
Fine.
I think, Stuart, if you want to ask your question and then the Home Secretary answers, but do not speak
Chair.
over each other, please.
My apologies, Chair. So there is an economic impact assessment, but you are saying to this committee you are not going to publish it.
Well, I'm saying that the bill has had scrutiny. The costs of the asylum system are published and well known. The costs of everything that we do in the immigration space and the impacts of immigration, legal and illegal, are all published. There are plenty of government sources where this information is out in the public domain. We'd happily collate some of that for you if you'd like that to help you make further decisions on the Nationality and Borders Bill. But the fact of the matter is, I mean, throughout every single aspect of the bill, the process of scrutiny, and also through the new plan for immigration, where there are sources and references in that document as well, it shows that our asylum system is collapsing under the weight of the various strains, abuses, sheer numbers coming to our country, and both the bill and the new plan for immigration, where there are published sources and data sources, demonstrate the work that we are doing to actually change the entire system.
Well, I mean, in short, that's a no. You're not going to publish economic impact assessment.
Well, I've been clear from the outset about the work around nationality and borders, what is published, what isn't published, and effectively further information that you'd like. If you want to send me some questions,
your permanent secretary said it would be published shortly. It's clear to me that the reason why it's not been published is a political reason. I mean, so
political about it.
Yeah, well, David Davis, he estimated in his speech during report stage that the cost of offshoring would be 17 billion or 32 billion. Does the Home Office have a figure?
So I'm not sure where that figure has come from, but I'd be very happy to circulate to the committee a wide range of costs in terms of asylum processing, the cost of the British taxpayer, which will demonstrate that the measures that we are bringing forward with the Nationality and Borders Bill are absolutely essential, not just in terms of long-term savings for the British taxpayer, but actually tackling some of the systematic issues that have caused the major strains and the collapse of our asylum system.
Secretary, we are well aware of what is published in terms of the cost of the asylum system currently. What we are interested in is the estimate that you quite clearly have on your desk of the cost of the measures that you are proposing to implement, and you're asking us to vote for them without telling us what you think those costs are. Is it 17 billion, 32 billion? What alternative estimate of the cost of offshoring do you have?
We have a range of figures, and I've already said, so
for
the benefit of the committee, I will happily write to the committee chair and provide costs, estimates, even some of the cost estimates based on future projections, if that would give you reassurance in terms of the wider implications of British taxpayers and also the implications for our asylum system.
Incredibly helpful, and can we get it very soon so that it can form the House of Lords in its consideration?
Of course.
And so next couple of weeks?
I'm sure we can make that possible.
That's helpful, thank you very much indeed. Can I also ask then now, so we've already spoken a little bit about the number of people who are in contingency accommodation just now, hostels and barracks and so on. I think but is it, am I right in saying, Mr. Rycroft, it's somewhere between 25 and 30,000 at the moment?
There's 25,000 people in hotels at the moment, yes.
Hotels at the moment. And is there a formal policy on the use of contingency accommodation, and is it possible for that to be published?
There's a statutory obligation to accommodate anyone seeking asylum who would otherwise be destitute, and it is up to the Home Secretary and the Home Office on how that obligation is fulfilled each time.
How are we going about that process just now? Because at the moment I'm getting lots of local authorities get in touch and they say, well, we've just been told that the Home Office are putting 200, 300, 400 in this hotel here, and they are only told after the hotel is booked, and regardless of whether or not the local authority thinks it's completely inappropriate or not, the wrong location, that doesn't matter. What are the Home Office's policies in that regard?
This has been a huge challenge, a huge operational challenge to us over the last year, as we've been having to work at enormous pace and intensity to fulfil our statutory obligations using the contractual framework that we've put into place. And I think we would absolutely acknowledge, I think as I said to the committee the last time I was here, that the pace at which we've had to operate it has made it really challenging to do the absolute best we could in terms of engagement with local authorities and giving people as much notice as possible. I think that what we've achieved has kind of been extraordinary in the way that we've mobilised to the very, very high numbers of people coming through. But we're absolutely determined to do better in future in building strong and constructive partnerships at local level as well. So I completely get that there's been some very difficult moments, and we're keen to do better in future.
Okay, so we'll come back to that, and hopefully the number of these incidents will decline.
It's just on this, MPs and local authorities are informed before any hotel is used. So that is absolutely the policy way of working of the team. I should just add to this as well, my views on all of this are pretty well known and documented. It is a thoroughly inadequate policy. It is not something that we want, and this is part of the reason why there is a lot of wider work taking place on asylum accommodation. We do not want people in hotels. We are looking at dispersed accommodation, first and foremost. We are looking at using and working with our partners in MOD, again, on alternative sites and alternative accommodation, it's right that we do that. And with that, of course, we are looking, as part of the new plan for immigration, work on reception centres. We should not be housing people in hotels. And there are a range of reasons as to why we are in this cycle of putting people in hotels. It is thoroughly, it's not, I don't even say it's a policy, because it's not. It's the culmination of a series of circumstances that have led us, because we have statutory duties and responsibility, obviously, to stop people from becoming destitute, where that has therefore led to that level of decision making.
Okay, now you have my full support in trying to return folk to dispersed asylum accommodation. You know fine well that
we need to work with local authorities on that as well, of course.
And I'll come to
and,
that
and across the country.
I'm far less supportive, in fact, outright opposed to the large-scale accommodation centres. But on the issue of local authorities then, during Home Office questions at one point you referred to the Home Office doing everything possible to provide local authorities with financial support and assistance. Yeah. That is just not something that local authorities recognise. They say, I mean, Patricia Hayes, you set out the excellent package, or the good package that's available to those taking part in the Afghan scheme, but there is nothing remotely like that for those who take part in asylum dispersal, which is why councils such as Stoke and others are withdrawing from it. What were you referring to? What sort of support was it you were referring to, Home Secretary?
Shall I pick that one up, Home Secretary? So, I mean, the financial package that I described for the Afghanistan resettlement scheme, which was very heavily based on the financial package that we put in place into the Syrian resettlement scheme, you're quite right. That's a very different, it's a totally different scheme with very different ground rules from the work that we're doing on asylum more generally, where the main route to funding for local authorities is through the mainstream local funding settlement, rather than through this bolt-on that we've put in place for the resettlement schemes. I mean, having said that, we have been doing a lot of work recently with the Local Government Association and with other councils to see how we can develop a new way of working with local authorities for asylum schemes, which recognises, as the Home Secretary said, the absolute financial as well as policy imperative of cutting the costs that we're currently incurring in hotels, which is now racking up at about £1.2 million every single day. So we're optimistic that we're going to be able to broker a new way of working with local government on how we manage these costs.
Well, that sounds better. Presumably the Home Office could save money from hotel costs if it actually spent a little bit of money encouraging local authorities.
There's no question about that. We have worked through all of that. We absolutely have. I mean, no one likes this policy of hotels. No one likes that approach at all. And it is obvious that we need to pay more to local authorities, because currently we have top 20 areas are contributing to 48% of all dispersed asylum accommodation. That is not good enough. So we do have a model. There is work underway here. We are absolutely proposing that we resource LAs based on all the factors that are needed in terms of support, the wider additional costs, etc., because obviously we want to work with wider partners.
That's encouraging. And the other side of that coin is also, and again it was a point I think made by Stoke City Council, is that the limits on the number of asylum seekers that are supposed to take operate on a city-wide basis, but this often leads to pockets of those cities being well in excess of that, and it's about giving local authorities more say over where asylum seekers are placed.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And on this, Trisha's already said this, but that comes back to the work, and this is work with the LGA. We have to be conscientious and very sensible and pragmatic about the implications of dispersed accommodation in our communities. Let's just be very clear about that. There are a range of societal factors that we are very sensitive to. We have to do this in the right and proper way. No department in central government can dictate outwards. We have to work bottom up and with our partners on dispersed accommodation, but actually on the issues of localities, localisation, the type of support they need.
Okay, final question on a very different subject. So this morning I understand the Supreme Court has upheld the Home Office fees in relation to registration of children as British citizens. So I'm obviously very disappointed at that, but the overarching issue remains. Thousands of children who are entitled to British citizenship do not get it because they cannot afford it. They are as entitled to that British citizenship as I am, as you are, as anyone in this room are. Your predecessor called it a huge sum of money. There isn't even a scheme whereby there can be a fee waiver or a fee reduction. Surely the Home Office will now think again about how much it charges these kids entitled to British citizenship to register as British citizens.
Well, look, I haven't seen the details of that judgment this morning, so obviously we have to look at that and look at that in the round in terms of the policy implications.
Do you accept it, what your predecessor said, that that's a huge sum of money?
No, because I actually, we have to look at all of these judgments and decisions before we make any comments whatsoever.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. And do we have a timescale for when this work with the LGA will be completed and that local authorities will get the financial support that they need?
We don't have a firm timescale. We're working very intensively at the moment.
Yeah.
The work is almost complete.
Nearly done,
yeah,
actually.
It's nearly done.
Nearly done.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
We can write to you about this once we have it all. There's some good work taking place.
Okay, Simon Fell.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Home Secretary, for joining us. I'd like to cover two areas, if I may. So, beginning with fraud and then moving on to online harms. Fraud, as you'll be well aware, is a growing problem. It accounts for roughly a third of all reported crime at the moment. And the most recent figures we have for Crime Survey for England and Wales showed a 43% increase in fraud and computer misuse, I believe. Action Fraud are seeing a roughly 36% increase in reports to them. And, you know, acknowledge this is a huge topic, spans from corporate crime down to low-level telephone scams and romance frauds, but I think there is a significant gap between the scale of this problem, which is growing, and the response to it. The DG for economic crime at the Economic Crime Command said that about 1% of police resources are dedicated to tackling this. So my initial question is how you plan to close that gap, and frankly, what does good look like for one of our constituents who falls victim to fraud?
So I think, can I start with your latter question point first of all, Mr. Fowle?
By the bell.
That's good. In terms of what good looks like, good has to be that when crime is reported, I say this for all crime, but on the fraud and economic in particular, that there is an understanding of what that crime is, and that it's not just reported, it's acted upon. So it goes into, you know, that sort of more process, but the next steps around investigation, data collection, etc., etc. It's pretty obvious that that is not happening right now. And when it comes to crime, economic crime and fraud is on the up. It is absolutely on the up. It's quite clever, it's sophisticated in some quarters, but in other quarters it's not very clever and sophisticated. And the pandemic has shown that, right? When you look at, 2 years of coronavirus, there has been a wide amount of online fraud and crime, defrauding even of government schemes, as we all now know about. And our National Crime Agency are absolutely engaged in all of that and have been from the outset. But I don't think I can sugarcoat this. We're not there. We're nowhere near there. And there are a number of things that government has to do. So first and foremost, this does link to some of the online harms bill work that's taking place. Number one, how advertising is treated online, and that often becomes a gateway, doesn't it, to entrapment. Mr. Fell, you mentioned romance fraud. Well, the honey traps and everything else, how people then sort of are coerced into even relationships online through advertising, etc., etc. So that is one component part, it's one aspect. But then let's not forget, economic crime doesn't just take place online, it takes place through many other aspects as well. So, we're looking at legislating now through an economic crime bill. I'm quite unapologetic. I do take quite a pushy stance on this. Not all of this as ever sits with us in the Home Office. We've got a range of measures that we've already been working through literally over certainly the last 2 years while I've been Home Secretary. Because quite frankly, there was a publication of an economic crime plan, I think actually in the summer of 2019, probably around the time that I became Home Secretary, but making progress through a lot of the work that we have a task force which is with the financial sector. They're amazing, they're incredible individuals and organisations, because they are part of how we can design out some of these crimes, and I actually would welcome more work in this area, working with the private sector, and we're doing that. But at the same time, we have to, through working with Treasury and BEIS, pull these key strands together, I would like to give this assurance that work is taking place. But if I can bring it back to where the Home Office is, roles such as organisations such as Action Fraud, the work of training our new police officers. So one of the interesting points about Police Uplift programme and the recruitment of new police officers all our police forces are saying this and showing this, is that because of the new entrants, they come with different skill sets, much more tech savvy, much more aware of using and interrogating data online, and that's now building new capacity within police forces. So none of this is going to change overnight. There is a big push, certainly on the policing side and on the criminal justice side, because obviously we have direct influence into that. But working across government, you will absolutely see legislation come forward in this area. And as I've said, I've already been working on certain measures that I would be putting in an economic crime bill from the Home Office's side.
And I'm glad to hear you reference the economic crime bill. I think it is badly needed. And that's welcome, but I think, going back to Mr. Daly's point around burglaries, there's an expectation if you are burgled that the police will attend your property, that you will get some form of victim support, and I think with fraud there is a significant gap where it feels at best your information is thrown into a black hole and you don't get much, if anything, of a response about it. And I was reading through the Beating Crime Plan, and there are welcome measures in there to improve the victim response, to increase arrests and prosecution. So steps in the right direction, but not much in the way of metrics around that. And I'd be curious to know what you think an acceptable increase would be in terms of arrests as a result of the measures that you're talking about.
I think first of all, it's difficult to sort of say this is what the framework should be around policing, metrics. We have to work with the police in terms of best practice. The College of Policing is central to this right now. And I think it's really important to understand, we are creating a skills base within policing. Skills base that doesn't exist. We have action fraud, and I'm afraid action fraud, not driving the outcomes that we would like to see. I'm very honest and open about that. I have huge resourcing, by that I mean financial support going in. City of London Police have been doing good work on this, but we can only build upon it and learn constantly. And we're doing that. So I think it's not right for me to say, therefore, from what we know thus far, we should be putting down a metric or a target, primarily because, as I've already said, and I've probably preempted some things that I shouldn't have preempted already, but I'm signalling towards changes in legislation. I think we need to combine those key elements together. We've got to aggregate those factors together, I think, to look at, what kind of other measures can come in place. There'll be Treasury impacts, there'll be BAYS aspects as well. But the policing bit, from my perspective, which comes back to the public engagement, is them having the capacity and the capabilities. It's actually more the capability to understand the changing nature of fraud and economic crime, what it means to an individual, how someone has become a victim, and therefore what are the actions that they are going to take. So Beating Crime Plan, quite clear in terms of the direction of travel, but then obviously with, I'll give Notts as an example again. Police and Crime Commissioners put a very, very clear plan in place in terms of tackling crime based on the Beating Crime Plan, and clear directions for the force itself. So force by force, I want to see consistency, of course. We can't have different outcomes across different forces or different approaches. We need to take the learnings first and foremost, and that's hard, that is difficult. But also we do have the National Crime Agency, and they lead on a lot of the dark web, the more sinister, horrible side of things that take place, which is why, again, Online Harms Bill absolutely helps, in terms of going into those component areas too.
Just on that point, so the Treasury Select Committee released a report on economic crime this morning, and I forgive you for not having read it before your appearance.
I knew it was coming.
But one of the recommendations in it was to simplify the structures around, and I'm condensing their findings very much, but simplify the structures around how law enforcement deals with economic crime more widely into a single law enforcement agency. And in your previous answer, I think you outlined some of what the challenge
Yes.
is. We have Action Fraud, we have City of London Police with the responsibility there, the NCA,
Yes.
ROCQs, individual forces. Just keen to take your mind as to whether you think that might be a good approach for us to take.
So look, I mean, I'd love a world of less process and less bureaucracy and more streamlining. I'm very clear about that. And quite frankly, policing should be much more direct. And, I will look at all options around this. I really will. National Crime Agency has some brilliant specialisms. It really, really does. Look at the fantastic work that they do. But also, we do need our police forces to have capability in these areas, because that's where the public go to. Public interfaces with their forces at a local level. So, we could have a major tasking agency, which we do have, but quite frankly, we've got to have that skills base, the right kind of skills base and the ability to investigate within our local police forces. The college is instrumental in that, and also and giving public confidence. The public need to report crime when it happens to them, so they've got to be able to do that locally at police forces.
Thank you. If I could just move on to online harms briefly. It's welcome that there's a standalone hate crime strategy being developed. We had a number of professional footballers in front of us in this committee talking about the online hate and abuse that they face as part of accessing the world online these days. I'm keen to hear your views on what the government should be doing to promote proactivity by social media companies. So, as part of that inquiry, we submitted examples of out-and-out racist abuse. There was no disputing what that content was. And even though we'd reported it, it sat there for weeks. You can easily go and search many online platforms and find similar abuse, again with no ambiguity around it, and it's not being taken down, even when it's being reported. And there doesn't seem to be an appetite to go after a lot of this stuff. I know the online harms bill is progressing. I'm just keen to know your thoughts on that and whether we should be pushing them to do more.
Yeah, I mean, I'm quite unequivocal on this. I think it's appalling. And I'm not even, pushing online companies to do more. Well, we're a little bit tired of pushing them. We are there nearly every day after every incident trying to push them. And quite frankly, I think there should be sanctions against them. I'm vocal about that. We shouldn't be tolerating this kind of awful cruelty online.
And thank you for that. And it's not just that. So my local paper, the North West Evening Mail, ran an expose of how they went onto various social media platforms to very easily access people selling Class A drugs online. It didn't even require much of a search to get there. This is a clear breach of the law. And I'm surprised they're able to do so. But I suppose the next part of my question is the mechanism that's used there is people make these searches, they're then pushed onto encrypted messaging platforms to essentially carry out the transaction to buy the drugs. We've had examples of, multiple examples of the far right using platforms like Telegram to share hate content, anti-Semitic content, multiple times. What's the appetite to, obviously there are free speech concerns there, but what's the appetite to move into that space and make sure that platforms like that are captured by the Online Harms Bill and any further legislation?
Yeah, well, there should be, absolutely. You will not be surprised, committee will not be surprised to hear, I mean, my views on this are very clear, and they have been, and they're consistent, that we should be looking at every single platform, and this comes back to end-to-end encryption. We should not have encrypted platforms where, they are not working with law enforcement when blatant criminality is taking place. And this has been the challenge and the battle that we've been having, actually, from my perspective, for around 2 years, just under 2 years, with many of these platforms. Some are better, some are much more engaging and cooperative, but it is right, in my view, it is absolutely right that law enforcement has the ability to work with these platforms where they have encrypted communications, where harm is taking place. And that applies to all aspects. I mean, child abuse, for example, extreme right-wing content, terrorist content, but also anything that is involving criminality, criminal behaviour. You know, we spoke earlier on, Chair, about perpetrator behaviours, the escalations. Selling drugs is a crime. That could escalate, not just with drugs, but firearms, all sorts of serious violence, serious harm and criminality. We know that these are never isolated incidents. So that is why I've always taken the view, I've always consistently made the case with these platforms when they sit in front of me with these organisations, that I think that they have actually a moral duty to be working with us in this space, because otherwise they are literally sheltering criminal behaviour and they're allowing some of the most appalling behaviours, violence. They're helping to perpetrate violence and to spread a lot of the cruelty, whether it's online harms but also criminality across not just our country and society but actually across the world.
Thank you. Very welcome views. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I would just like to ask you one further question. In the opening remarks that you made, you talked about the failure in leadership of the police, and I just wondered whether you wanted to elaborate on that and be a bit more specific.
Well, I spoke about this obviously in terms of those awful, the IPC report yesterday, but also the fact that there's been this culture. We spoke about this obviously within the context of misogyny, the awful comments, obviously in relation to that report. In terms of failure of leadership, the fact that those behaviours were allowed to take place, there were no disciplinary actions, no one saying that's wrong. That is actually about leadership in policing. So that's superiors, that's seniors, line managers calling that behaviour out and actually stopping it in the first place. I mean, the report made it quite clear that those behaviours were taking place for a number of years.
And that's the Commissioner as well of the Metropolitan
Well, it's across the
Police?
board. It is across the board. But what was published yesterday in that IOPC report is beyond, it's unacceptable in every sense of the word. So everyone in policing has a leadership responsibility, and that applies to every single level. Whether you're a sergeant, whether you're a line manager, whether you're overseeing the professional development team, whether you're the direct line manager or anyone in policing, there should be a full understanding of what is right and what is wrong in terms of behaviours. And obviously that cascades through an entire organisation.
It obviously starts at the top in terms of the culture
It's
that
at
we've
every
been
level.
talking about.
Chair, I think it's at every single level in
And
policing.
you've got confidence that the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police can make the changes that are required in terms of culture?
I'm actually, Chair, I'm very clear and upfront with the Commissioner about the problems that we see in policing, in the Metropolitan Police. Let's just be very specific about the Met Police in particular, with a range of failure points where there's, I'm not even going to call it underperforming, but behaviours, culture, particularly post the awful murder of Sarah Everard. And I'm very, very challenging directly with the Commissioner. I will continue to be so because the public want answers. The public want to have greater confidence and assurance. But obviously that is led by the Commissioner. And
you're confident in the current Commissioner?
Well, look, I've always said that I'm confident in her and her work, but that also means that change is required in terms of the areas, some of the areas we've been discussing today, and there are many areas as well. We've got an inquiry taking place into the murder of Sarah Everard. There's work taking place, inquiry into betting. There are lots of issues. It's not straightforward with the Met, and there are lots of issues there where we need to see major significant improvements. Culture, delivery, accountability, and protecting the streets, protecting our streets, but also the public in London.
And I thank you, Home Secretary, and the officials for coming along today and for bearing with us. I think we've been going for an hour and 47 minutes, so thank you very much for your time, and we look forward to seeing you again later in the year. Thank you, Chair.
The proceeding has ended. The proceeding has ended. The proceeding has ended.